Middle Path Radio, your number one online Islamic talk station.
A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome to another episode of Raw with Raza. Today the key story I thought that we could talk about really would be the Queen's speech. Those of you who may or may not have seen the story, I'll give a bit of a recap. So on Wednesday we had the state opening of Parliament, and that is when the government kind of outlines its plans for the following year, and the Queen reads out a speech which is written by the government, so David Cameron's Conservative government, for her to read out, which kind of gives a general idea of what they'll be looking to pursue. Now, it's very interesting because the government uses this as an opportunity normally to say, look, this is where we are, here's what we've done, here's what we've achieved kind of thing, and here's what we're looking to do, and gives a hint of things that may come on later. So things that are definitely going to be legislation are mentioned, and then there's stuff like, we will do this, we will consider doing this, etc. So, I mean, just from a political, I'll talk about just the general politics of it all, and then what it means for the Muslim community and politics later. But generally, from a political point of view, this was quite a bland speech in comparison to the previous ones the Queen has done. If you ever Google Queen's speech on the government website, or you see over the years how they've been given and the proclamations and the announcements that have been made. And yeah, to be honest, this was a bit of a bland one in comparison, and it's primarily because of the EU referendum, which is something I think I'll look to cover in a future video as we get closer to the referendum voting day. But the government doesn't want people to vote against them on the referendum, for saying, because the government wants people to stay in the EU. A lot of people are saying they want to get out of the EU, and the government basically put in a very bland Queen's speech because they just didn't want the hassle that comes with it. I mean, that shows you the farce of the democracy that we live in, just because it's about trying to play for votes. I mean, if anything, it should be about the interests of our citizens, but you can see how the Conservatives are acting. So that's what happened with the Queen's speech, quite bland. And to be honest, I think the real Queen's speech, the real stuff that's going to happen, I feel we're going to see after the EU referendum. So once we've got that out of the way, whether we're in or out, whatever happens, either way, that's when we'll start to see stuff really start to take place. But I thought I'd focus on a couple of things that really stood out, and just the Muslim response to it, what it means for us. And one of them is the Bill of Rights. So the Queen mentioned in the speech, which is that they'd be looking to introduce a British Bill of Rights. Now, this is something the government's been doing for a very long time and talking about this. And basically what they're saying is the European Convention on Human Rights is a gag. It's gagging us, the British, from doing what we want. And because we're so good at human rights, and you know how great our record is, right? If you haven't bothered to read history, then yeah, you might believe that. But basically, they said that, we need to have our own British Bill of Rights where we set our own laws and stuff in place. Now, the problem is that you've got people like Theresa May and David Cameron and others like Michael Gove, the former education secretary with the whole Trojan horse thing happening with the Muslim schools. These guys are pushing for a British Bill of Rights. Now, the problem is with the British Bill of Rights is that you and I can be fairly certain that you and I won't be treated as equal citizens under that kind of legislation. We've already seen how frustrated they've been that they have to go by the European conventions and, not detain people for too long or show them respect, etc. So the thing is, there is that worrying element of the British Bill of Rights. But the thing is, right now, the government is delaying how we move forward with that just because they're not sure how it would work. The kind of the legal loopholes will have to jump through, the legal barriers and stuff. So the thing is, it's right now that's been on the back burner. But the second thing, though, which has been fascinating to see, has been the counter-extremism bill. When I say fascinating, I do mean horrifying. And it's that the government has said that, we're going to have that there'll be more powers to ban extremist preachers and to intervene in madrasas and other places where children are taught. They also included undisclosed new powers to come out of a review. Basically, the government had launched a review by Louise Casey, and the review was about Muslim integration in British society. That was what they actually been looking into. I mean, the thing is, it's unbelievable because you take the word Muslim out and you put in any other community's name, and that's racist and it's bigoted. It's wrong. If you said we're going to do a review of how the Jewish community are integrating into British society, you're like, well, how dare you even ask that question? They're British citizens, and that's it. That's all that matters. How dare you say that? But the narrative around us is built up that we're different, we're the other, we don't belong, etc. But the counter-extremism bill is something the government mentioned last year too. And if you actually Google counter-extremism strategy 2015, you'll find a document on the government's website. It's got a purple front cover, definitely worth checking out and having a read through it properly. And the thing is this, you and I, guys, we should be properly informed about these matters. We shouldn't wait for a news article to give us some information or someone to make like a snazzy 3-minute video for us to break it down. I know it comes in handy, but this stuff really, really impacts us and our community and our children. So we have to be well versed in the whole thing. You know, and also just from any other kind of, you know, if you're involved with a mosque or if you know someone that works at a mosque and stuff, man, we need to be articulate in explaining why we are against something or why we're countering something, because otherwise it's just like it's bad, it treats us bad. That's nothing. We need to have a bit more, you know, concrete information as to why we're against it. Because also remember, for a general non-Muslim public, they'll be watching it, they'll watch the fact that Muslims seem to get angry about all this stuff, and what they'll think is this: that, man, these Muslims, they don't do anything to tackle terrorism, but they always get angry at us when we want to do something. You see what I mean? And the reason is because we don't own that narrative. We don't explain what the problem is. So I thought I'd explain to you what some of the problems are with the counter-extremism bill. First of all, it's what's their definition of extremism. It's such a vague term. It really, to be honest, means any Muslim that speaks out, any Muslim that dare criticizes the government, and and says that your foreign policy causes terrorism. You know, it's you're to blame for ISIS, not Islam, mate. You caused the rise of ISIS. All these things, and so that's one part of it. The second thing is this: the powers that are actually being proposed are extreme themselves. So they want to be able to ban extremist preachers. A, what makes someone an extremist preacher? But B, what happened to free speech, mate? What happened to all that stuff about Je suis Charlie and Charlie Hebdo? And now we have to stand up for free speech. When it comes to Muslims, you're not so much Je suis Charlie, are you? And I think it's important that we call out that hypocrisy. I mean, and also there is a review coming out, like I said, Louise Casey's review of Muslim integration in British society. That again is something that we need to look at and say, hang on, where's the review being done? What's the methodology being employed? But secondly, what are the key questions being asked of us, and what's the objective behind it all? To be honest, I don't appreciate the question. I don't appreciate the line of questioning, the way we're being treated, and the whole thing we have to call out. The thing with the counter-extremism bill is this, guys, that the government's actually hit a massive wall, a massive barrier, and that is this: their definition of extremism is so vague that essentially, people in the legal profession are saying, how are you going to make this stick? No, it's what do you call an extremist? Because they've included stuff like, they wanted to include stuff like about Israel Palestine. And mate, guess what? A lot of non-Muslims are quite adamant that what Israel does is wrong, and many people believe Israel doesn't have a right to exist on stolen land. So what, you're going to call them all anti-Semites, and you're going to stick them all under the counter-extremism bill? So the thing is, there's some massive issues for the government. But also, for example, is this: they say that part of our British values is tolerance. So here's a question for you. What equals tolerance? Imagine you come across an elderly white non-Muslim couple that live somewhere in Middle England, and they don't like gay people, right? Or they don't support gay marriage. Now, is it British to tolerate their views, or is it British to say, hang on, your views are against our values? Which one is it, right? There's actually, if you go on YouTube, you can find a video where on BBC Radio 4, Theresa May, the Home Secretary, was asked, can you please define what you mean by British values? And they're so slimy that what they say is this: British values include, rule of law, respect, democracy, and, tolerance for each other. So it includes. What she's not said is, so when he says something includes, that means you've not given the beginning of the list. What's the beginning? What's the end of the list? All we've said is it's a large category, which we don't know what it is, what the definition is, but it includes these 3-4 things. It's very slimy, very pathetic, and the government's really hit a massive barrier there. But so the thing is this: it's and also if we're saying it's wrong for a person to be against gay marriage, which let's say an elderly white non-Muslim couple might be, are they now extremists? But secondly, if they are, what about government ministers who voted against gay people having the right to marry? Are they extremists now as well? Now the reality is, and if you watch some of the interviews, people say, well, they're not the kind of people we're after. What they mean is, we're trying to go after the Muslims, mate, right? And it's and you and I need to call out, and we need to escalate the pressure. Now with the Impact team, we did an action alert about this, trying to get Muslims, mobilizing Muslims to email their MPs, put pressure on them, have meetings with them, demand that the MP speaks out against this bill, because actually it's a massive problem. And guess what? We've had a massive victory in the last couple of weeks, because just this week, Jeremy Corbyn has said that the prevent strategy needs to be re-looked at, that it's not right the way it's being treated, and that actually, remember, he said his wording was that actually the way Britain's got, we need to basically stop having an unethical foreign policy and actually, stand up for human rights and not support dictators and not give weapons to people in the Middle East, etc. And it's great. So what we're seeing is the opposition, especially with Jeremy Corbyn in charge, is actually saying, hang on, the prevent strategy needs to be properly reviewed because it's alienating more Muslims. And I think with this argument about counter-extremism, prevent, etc., the reason why the argument has built up more momentum is because more and more people are calling it out. But the problem is, right now, as a Muslim community, we haven't escalated our call out of this problem. And I think I've said this in previous videos too, that for Muslims, what we don't do is this, man, we don't escalate in a fight. So let me give you an example. The government talks about British values. Now, we know that's rubbish. That's a load of BS. But we haven't escalated and forced them to explain what do they mean by that? How dare they say that? What are they trying to get at? Right now, the government gets away with being vague. But if you have a community of 3 million and growing people, Muslims, right, demanding answers, organizing demonstrations, mass sit-ins, protests, writing into their MPs, demanding meetings with the Home Secretary, mosques signing the government e-petitions with 100,000 signatures. Man, we could force the government to come to the table and say, oh, you better explain yourself. And I think that's an important thing I'd say to people to take away from this video is that the Queen's speech is more of the same that we've already heard in the past. But at the same time, we're one step closer to these draconian policies being a reality. Now, if we don't want it to be a reality, we don't want this to be a nightmare scenario where this actually happens, then you and I need to wake up, clean up, and stand up. We need to actually make sure we do something about this. We call out the government on this, get organized, get involved with Muslim groups on this issue, and escalate. And I think this is important, guys, because I always say this every video, and that is, there's a work ethic that we need. We need to make sure we're working on these issues on a long-term basis. Look at the Trojan horse stuff. Look at all these different stories. The government's been found out on a lot of issues, but what they do is that, again, like with the Sheikh Salman Ghani example too, is that they hope that you will go away, that you will stop paying attention, that you will stop asking the hard questions, and you and I need to really put the pressure on them. And I think I think the final thing I want to end with today is, that this week was also the kind of commemoration of Malcolm X's life. I mean, this week he would have been 91 or 92 years old if he wasn't assassinated. And I think Malcolm X, was a great example of a kind of Muslim that you and I should be. He was fearless in speaking the truth. He wasn't afraid of any man. He was only afraid of God. He was on a quest to search for the truth and do whatever was necessary. And I think very few Muslims today, you and I, we can say the same thing. But we look up to people like him. We look up to the people, our messenger, obviously, the Sahaba, and other great people that have come and gone. But really, we shouldn't just look up to them. We should be looking to emulate them and actually stand like them. And you have to ask yourself, if they saw a Queen's speech, or if they saw the Conservative government trying to clamp down on Muslims, would they have shied away from it? Would they have buried their head in the sand? No. If anything, they would have stood up and said, we need to make a stand against this issue, because if we don't, it will impact our deen, our lives, and our children's lives, and that of the future generation. So I think, guys, that's what I'd say from this speech, is that let's educate ourselves on what the government is doing. Let's organize ourselves politically. If you don't want to do that, then at least fund the groups that are doing that. But finally, what's really important is take that step. Take that step to be people like Malcolm X, like the Prophet, peace be upon him, like the walking Quran, the Prophet, how he was. That's how he was described. Take that step to be like these great people that have come from our religion, that Allah has blessed and guided. Because if you and I don't, we are hampering our community for the future. But if you and I take that step, man, I guarantee you, Allah will open up the doors for us. And that's not my guarantee. It's Allah's guarantee. Take that, it says you walk towards Allah, He comes running towards you. And that's what it is. Guys, let's take that step, because if we do, we can't lose. We'll call the government out. We'll see an end to injustice. But yeah, guys, inshallah, I hope you found this beneficial. And let's hope that, we see the government, the Muslim community starting to take more of a political, organized approach to these issues. If you need any support, obviously please give me a shout on Facebook, Twitter, or even through the guys at Middle Path Radio. Let's maybe even have a Q&A on this if you're interested on what we can actually do. But in the meantime, guys, I'll speak to you next week. Assalamu alaikum.
Middle Path Radio, your #1 online Islamic talk station.